Um, the old stories from Genesis and Exodus were told around campfires and in camps for many generations before literacy became a thing. And they were told and retold, sometimes changed slightly, sometimes embellished, but the very best tales survived the changes to become the truth that is in the Bible today. We just have to study it in order to determine what that truth is. Imagine, if you will, a small group of a dozen family members and a few guests in a camp, neighbors from another family, at the end of a long, hard day, relaxing after their evening meal. The visiting has been done, and the gossip and the news has been exchanged, but nobody is yet quite tired enough to go to sleep, and they can't turn on the TV to watch the game. But they do have something even better. They have a campfire. A campfire of dancing flames and glowing coals that sparks the imagination, and somebody says, we need a story to end the day and send us off to bed. And they turn to their very best storyteller, someone who remembers all of the tales, and they ask that person. For the children, so they remember, says the elder. I will tell you how we learned to trust our God as we trekked through the desert in our escape from Egypt. And then he would tell you this story from Exodus, chapter 17. The first 7 verses that tell the story of water from the rock. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff of which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So that's the story that the elder told. And the next day, in your imagination, the next day somebody is out herding the goats and paying attention to what the goats are doing, but it's really a boring task. Watching a few dozen goats as they feed. So the mind wanders to last night's story. And maybe a friend brings over a sandwich somewhere around midday so that they can have lunch together. Oh, and those couple of guests from the next village, They're walking back to their own town, their own people. And people walked a lot in those days, but walking is boring. So they talk about the story that they heard last night. And they had heard this story many, many times since they were children. But the boredom of walking frees the mind to really think about it. Now, in the courses that I take at Preacher School, St. Andrews in Edmonton, or in Saskatoon rather, the instructors urge me over and over and over again to engage in theological reflection. That's thinking about God and the stories about God and God's relationship with humans. It's like I should be walking home for 3 or 4 hours thinking about it, or out watching goats as they at their food all day to really do it right. But here I am, theological reflection. That's what these people are doing. So, I wonder if it really happened like that, says one person. Well, I imagine that they were getting pretty thirsty in the desert, says the other. No doubt, but maybe there's got to be more to it than that. What do you mean, more to it? Well, sometimes these old stories are tricky. And sometimes you think someone is just telling a story, but they're really saying something different, something bigger. Well, what could be bigger in that story? Well, remember that these people had spent 400 years as slaves, and they were really comfortable in Egypt. Sure, the work was hard, and they had no human rights or freedoms. Their freedoms had been taken away, but they did have food and water, and they didn't have to make any big decisions. So in the desert, they were trying to figure out how to look after themselves as people. So where does the water come in? Well, how about maybe the water represents what they have to learn? Ah, come on, you're getting all allegorical on me. No, seriously. Maybe this is one of those times that the storyteller gets sneaky and wants us to think about water as maybe a whole lot of life lessons that those folks don't have yet and they have to learn. But what about Moses hitting the rock with his magic wand? Okay, let me think about that for a minute. God tells Moses to hit the rock and water pours up, right? So the water is really God's business. God provides the water, so maybe God has to provide the knowledge too. Maybe we are thirsty for knowledge and God provides it. But isn't this the same story as the one they told us about God providing food when they were in the desert? Well, it's kind of the same, I guess. But that one has a little bit more. Remember how the food spoiled if they kept it too long? Well, I think there's one more, that one's more about living today and not worrying so much about tomorrow, because by tomorrow everything could be spoiled. But you say they had to learn a lot of stuff when they were in the desert. But we already know a lot of stuff now. Our parents teach us, and we learn from the elders. And God doesn't really have to tell us what to do and think. Or, well, maybe God is behind it all, giving the elders and the storytellers some special insight. Or maybe they just make up stuff and lie to us. Well, I suppose that is possible. Some slick salesman comes along, or politicians, and they can really con a guy. Yeah, I got taken by that a time or two myself before I figured out who was conning me. The worst was that Bernie Madoff guy. But that's the real point, isn't it? If you really think about things, it's like Moses hitting the rock, and all that knowledge and all that water, all that wisdom just comes pouring out. Well, maybe you're right. Or maybe you're putting too much into it, and it really happened just like the story said, and that's all there is to it. Well, I think the truth is always bigger than what the story actually says. Amen. Now I have to tell you how that came about. I had written my sermons much earlier in the week, and last night, just before chili, I turned on my computer to go through my sermon, and it disappeared. And I muttered under my breath, I have to admit that, and I said, okay, but it's short enough, I can remember most of it, I'll just slip away and type it up. But when I started typing, I didn't type what I had done before. This is what I typed. Where did it come from? I don't know. I came up and I told Jess this, and she said, I wonder what God had in store for you when he messed up your computer like that. Right? We tend to blame God for a lot of these happy accidents that happen in our lives. God is an important part of this storytelling, the one I did this morning. It's not my story. It's kind of, it just happened in a hurry last night. I knew what I wanted to say, but it came out entirely different than what I had planned on. And that's the story of how that sermon came about. I will let everybody know that we're not doing a hymn after the service because we're shortening things up. A reminder to people that the collection plate will not be passed. It's sitting at the back of the room for when people leave. And those people who are listening online can certainly make a donation to St. James United Church. We are a church, and we do need to make a collection. In our prayers for the people this morning, we have many people around the world who are subject to all kinds of strife, some of it natural strife, storms and famine and so forth. And we have strife that is human caused. And we pray that the people find the water they need, the wisdom that they need, the strength that they need to get through these rough times. And a special prayer this morning to the members of the Malo family who will be burying the oldest sister next Saturday. Now is an opportunity for anybody in the congregation to voice aloud or hold voice quietly within themselves the names of those people in their lives who need special prayers this morning. And we will conclude with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I have a couple of announcements. One is I will not be here on Tuesday. I will be opening up the